Okay, today we are going to talk about annotations, which are tools to annotate data. Okay, we'll get started. Data set. Right-click, build data set. We're going to do C-scan for this one, and we'll get rid of that. Drag out our C-scan, go to the toolbox, annotation folder. There's a lot of annotations in here. Box is a pretty basic one. I'll drag it out, and our data is annotated. So if we click on the annotation, there's a properties. I'd say most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Color for one, but let's cover a few. I want to cover how you show the annotations on the various outputs. So we'll start by dragging out the second subset of the C-scan, and you'll notice that the annotation is shown on both. And if you right-click, there is a task to say, I only want it on this subset, and I want it on all I want it on all subsets. Okay, and you see that's all happy. It moves together. Just a little hint of what's happening under the hood. If we look at this now, refresh, you see the container of the annotation is the data set. When I show on this subset only, refresh it, and the container is the data subset. So all it's doing is moving it between these containers. So, if you ever need to do it under the hood, that's how you do it. Okay, next, let's look at it. Maybe we'll start by next looking at this property permanent. It's a little subtle, but it's probably worth knowing it's there and how to use it. And what it means is when I load new data into my tree, do I throw my annotation out or do I keep it? Obviously, there's use cases for both. If your annotation is particular to that data, you'll probably leave it false and it'll get thrown out. And if it's relevant to, say, the type of data, like some permanent feature that's on all your different scans, then it can be permanent. But that's good to know because you'll sometimes load data and wonder where the annotation's gone, and that is probably the answer. Okay, so let's look at things going down the tree. So I'm going to add a couple of processors to my tree. I'll do an invert, and I'll do an amplitude, and I'm just going to process along the second axis so that I keep my first axis, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay, so invert, the annotation is not showing up. So we click here, we've got the properties for our annotation, and the property that is of interest is draw on children. And that property basically means, do you propagate the annotation down the tree or not? And that's your choice, and sometimes you want to and sometimes you don't. Okay, so we'll look at the amplitude, and we'll put the draw on children, and it does not show up. So how is that getting filtered off? And these properties, they're a little on the tricky advanced side to use, but you probably at some point will need to use them. And what they are saying is that I will propagate down the tree because we have drawn children true, but I am restricted by these criteria. And the first one is my first axis has to be millimeters, and the second one was millimeters. I got rid of it. And the axis type is basically saying what kind of axis it is. And this was a scan axis, the motion scan axis, so that's fine. But this one is saying I'm an index axis. Now my second axis here is not an index axis, so the -1 is an I don't care on that, and now that is showing up on that one. And it's probably honestly not something you'd want to do because it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's important to know the mechanism. So we had two things stopping this. One saying I only want it on an index axis, and it goes away, and the other one was saying it's millimeters, and this one is percent. So that stops it from dropping down the tree onto something that has changed shape and probably doesn't make sense to display. Whereas this one, the dimensions are the same, or not this one, the invert, it makes sense, so we display it there. Okay, so that's a very basic introduction to annotations, but there are a lot of other things you can do with it, a lot of other tools that can be used to display annotations and mark up your data and automate that marking up. I'll just sort of hint at a few things. I'm not going to cover them. The annotation set is an interesting tool. I'm just dropping a few more boxes on here. I dropped my data set on that, and I look at my table, and it's summarized this as a table. So so you can mark them up with a given type of annotation and summarize it. You could perhaps put a table in a report. Another very powerful tool. There are some there are tools that will do arrays of annotations that you can build up programmatically, perhaps a C# or some other sequence, and then spray those into your data sets to mark them up in a more automated way. And what other tools? Yeah, there's an annotation set and tools, a node that helps you add annotations. Anyway, I'm not going to cover those, but just hints that there are other things available that you can use in a more advanced way. Okay, that's it for now.